Okay, well, I did my doctorate in neurophysiology, as I mentioned. I have many neuroscientist friends, and many people are interested in this problem, obviously. And the path that they always go is, how can the brain explain the mind? Why is the output of the brain the mind? And many different theories from neuroscientists, most of whom believe that the firing of electrical impulses, the flow of chemicals across synapses between the neurons, in some sense, maybe gross electrical activities across brain areas. In some sense, the activities of the neurons themselves, circuitry, whole brain areas. In some sense, consciousness is a product of all of that. That's their assumption, but they never, ever make any progress on what it feels like in terms of the inner experience.
Well, so let me give you a few examples indicating why the problem is hard addressed that way. So we have learned a great deal about this relationship between our brain and our consciousness, no doubt about that, especially in the past 20 years, but even prior to that. But there are many things that remain exceedingly mysterious, and sometimes they are very important also from a practical point of view. I'll give you some examples. There are some patients who look, for all practical purposes, unconscious. They don't move, they don't behave, they have no purpose for activity. And if you're a neurologist, you have to look at them and ask yourself, is there something it is like to be that person? Is there somebody in there who is having experiences of any sort, maybe even pain, or is he hearing something, and so on? And that's not an easy question to answer. So we look inside the brain, we do now a functional MRI, we do EEG recordings, we do all kinds of things in a more and more sophisticated manner to try to figure out what's going on. Is there anybody home in there? If you look carefully, in some cases, for instance, you may find that some parts of the brain, some islands of brain tissue, are still very active in a way it's almost normal. But the rest is like a sea of destruction. There is nothing else, okay? So if you're faced with this person who is not behaving at all for months, so clinically it's called vegetative state because we assume there is nobody there. But there is a piece of brain in the cerebral cortex, for instance, which is heavily active. Say a piece of brain that has to do with usually sound perception and so on. What do you make of it? Should you think that there is nobody there, or there is somebody there who's just perceiving sounds and nothing else? He has experiences, he may hear your voice but doesn't understand much more than that. Or maybe there is a full consciousness in there. So we can't address this purely by looking at what's happening in the brain right now. Let me give you another example. When you have a newborn baby or a preterm baby, okay, we know that the activity in the cerebral cortex is minimal. The fibers among the neurons are still not there. They are not myelinated yet. So the communication is very bad. But there are some parts, like the amygdala, which is usually involved in fear, for instance, that are very active. So what is it like to be a newborn baby? Is it like to be anything at all? Is it utter confusion, as William James would say? Is there purely perception of fear, maybe the fear of having been thrown into this world and not knowing what it means, and that's why the amygdala is active? Or there is basically nothing there? Okay, these are questions, again, that you can't answer just by looking at the brain as such. I'll give you a few more examples of this. So then we have, take an animal like an octopus. An octopus has a rather big brain with a central ganglion and then several other ganglia, almost as big, in the various arms. Now, what is it like to be an octopus? Is an octopus conscious? Does it have experiences? What kind of experiences? Is there one experience, a centralized one, and many peripheral ones? Is there a big one? We don't know that. And you can study the brain of the octopus as much as you want, not that we know much about it. It's going to be hard to know that.
So the process from going from brain to mind is a difficult one.
It is important to study the brain, but you will never squeeze the essence of consciousness out of gray matter. You can squeeze it as a sponge as much as you want. You will never get experience flowing out of it because suddenly there is some special property of the neurons firing at 40 hertz or whatever else that might be that suddenly generates experience. And this is why philosophers have rightly pointed out for a long time that this is a very hard problem. In fact, it is so hard that I grant you it is impossible to solve that way. You cannot solve the problem of consciousness by looking at the brain, taking it in your hands, and asking yourself, how could this piece of gray matter give rise to the phantasmagory and the colors and the beauty and the shapes of experience. You will not squeeze it out of that. You need to take a different approach.
What is that approach?
I think the approach is to go exactly the other way around. So while, in neuroscience, we, including myself, are trying to find the correlates of consciousness. We are trying to find out what happens in the brain when you perceive this, how does it change when you don't perceive it, how does it change when you perceive something else. This is all very important, of course, in understanding how the brain works. But we can't hope to then extract consciousness from that. So let's take the opposite approach. This is what I always thought. Let's try to start from consciousness itself, ask what is it like to be conscious, to have an experience, identify its essential properties, and then ask, well, physical systems, including the brain, how should they be organized? How should they be arranged in order to be able to account for those properties? I think that is the way to address the mind-body problem.